Today we are solving equations using angle properties. So before we get into the solving of the equations, I wanted to review the relationship between the angles created when a transversal line intersects two parallel lines. So here I have two parallel lines and they're intersected by the transversal. It's very helpful if you start with a circle around each of the intersections and then you start to shade. I'm going to shade the top left angle. And then I'm going to shade the angle that is across from that. It would be the vertical angle to this angle, or you can call it the bottom right. And exactly how I shaded the first circle, I'm going to shade the second circle. So the top left, and then the bottom right. This shading makes it very easy to remember how to find those missing angles. If they give you an angle, one measure, and they ask you to find the rest of the angles in this diagram, if you pay attention to the shading, it will give you a clue as to what they are. So for example, if they're shaded the same color, all of those angles have the same measurement. But if they are opposite in color, for example, if one is shaded and one is not, then they add up to 180 degrees. So if you look here at your diagram, for example, if they said that this angle was 60 degrees, then you would know every single angle that's not shaded is 60 degrees. And you would also know that this angle would have to be 180 minus 60 because these two add up to 180. So I said if this angle was 60, then all of the angles that are not shaded would be 60. And then remember I said the opposite color adds up to 180 degrees. So because this angle is 60 right here, and this one is shaded and this one is not, they're opposite in color. If they add up to 180, then you could say 180 minus 60, which is 120. So this angle would be 120. This angle would be 120. This angle would be 120. And this angle would be 120. You're going to use this diagram when it comes to the notes for today. So if you'll go to the So when I go to my very first example, it says, when angles are congruent, set them equal to solve for the variable. If you'll notice that we have colored bubbles here, if you look at the relationship between this angle and this angle, it looks like two V's connected at the point. That makes them vertical angles. And we know that vertical angles are congruent. So we can grab this blue and move it here and here. And then we also know that these two are vertical as well. So what that means is because they're both congruent to each other, the x plus 15 and the 4x minus 5, if we're going to solve for x, all we have to do is say x plus 16 equals 4x minus 5. Now we have an equation with x's on both sides. We always take the smaller x and move it back over to the big X. So this is basically like saying 1x. So I'm going to subtract 1x here to get rid of it. And 4x minus 1x is 3x. I bring down whatever I haven't used yet. So 3x minus 5 on the right equals 16 on the left. And I'm going to rewrite that right over here just so that I can have more room to work. So 16 equals 3x minus 5. Now I have 3x that I need to get isolated, so I have to get rid of the minus 5. The opposite of minus 5 is plus 5. And 16 plus 5 is 21. So 21 equals 3 times x. The opposite of times 3 is to divide by 3. And 21 divided by 3 is 7. So x equals 7. You can write it in or you can click on the text box and type it in. If you notice there's a second question, it says, what's the measure of the angles? We found x. We said x is 7. But remember we have the angles and they say this angle was x plus 16 and this angle was 4x minus 5. Since the angles are congruent, we don't have to do it both times, but we do have to go back and take this x and plug it into that equation for x. So we know x is 7. Well, if x is 7, then this becomes 7 plus 16. And 7 plus 16 is 23. So right here, the angles are 23 degrees. Or 23. So the angles are 23. When I go to the next example, if you need to here, pause or replay, go ahead and pause and replay to look at that example again. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place my circles at the angles that are congruent. So if you notice, I have this one shaded, and so then we know this one is also blue. Just like we did earlier when we shaded it in, but we're placing the circles just like we did when we shaded on that very first slide. So then the yellows would go here and here. That one's a little big, so I'm going to shrink it down a little bit. And probably going to have to do the same thing with this one and this one. Okay. And here.
Okay, guys, it's time for dismissal.
Okay, now that we have our circles placed, if you notice, the shading is done just like we did with the big circles. So top left, bottom right, top left, bottom right are all the same color. If they are the same color, then they are congruent. And if you look at these two angles, they are alternate exterior angles, so they must be congruent. So that means that we can set them equal and solve. So we have 3y plus 53.
Okay, first time buses, you may.
3y plus 53 is equal to 7y minus 55. So again, we have this variable on both sides. The variable is y. So we need to decide which variable we're going to move over. Since we have 3 on the left and 7 on the right, we'll move the 3 over. And that leaves me with 53. I'm going to rewrite it over a little bit so I have some room to work. So 53 equals 7y minus 3y is 4y. And then I bring down the minus 55. The opposite of minus 55 is plus 55. So when I add 53 and 55, 3 plus 5 is 8, and 5 plus 5 is 10. So I have 108 equals 4y. The opposite of times 4 is divided by 4. So I need to divide 108 divided by 4, and I get 27. So right here, we can actually change this if you want, if it drives you nuts. If it doesn't bother you, you can leave it as x. Right here it says, what is x? It's y. Y equals 27. And then what is the measure of the angles? To find the measure of the angles, you would put 27 in for y in one of these. So for this one, it would be 3 times 27 plus 53. And again, you could put that in the calculator or do it by hand. You multiply 3 times 27 and add 53, you would get 134 degrees. And because these two angles are congruent, you don't have to do it twice. You only have to do it once. Both angles are 134. If you scroll down to the next example, again, I have my parallel lines here and my transversal. So I'm going to start doing the problem by drawing my circles. And I'm going to shade this time this one because there's already an arc there and it'll get confusing. And then the vertical angle. And it doesn't matter which ones you shade as long as you shade the same one on both circles. So then this one and this one again. And if you notice, this one is 35 degrees, it says, but it's shaded. And this one is not. So the reason that that one and this one would add up to 180 degrees, the ones that are shaded are all 35. That means that this angle right here is 35 degrees. And these two angles right here, this one and the one right here, they add up to this 180 because they're supplementary. So what we know about these two angles, this one is 35. They add up to 180, and this one is x plus 85. So if I write the two equations with a plus sign in the middle, so 35 plus x plus 85, that equals 180 degrees. And you may notice in this equation on the left-hand side, you have two numbers without variables. So we need to go ahead and combine those first. And when you add 35 plus 80, when you're adding 35 plus 85, 5 plus 5 is 10, 8 plus 3 is 11, plus 1 is 12. So 35 plus 85 is 120, and you still have the x plus 120 equals 180. You're going to subtract that 120 from both sides so that x is by itself. And when you subtract 180 minus 120, you get 60. So x is equal to 60. It wants to know the measure of the angles. We know the first angle is 35, but we need to know the other angle. If x is 60, then this angle is 60 plus 85 because it's x plus 85. 5 plus 0 is 5, and 8 plus 6 is 14. So it's 145. So our two angles are 35 and 145. Okay, so then we're going to look at the next example. And again, we're going to start by drawing our circles and shading in. So I'm going to shade top left and bottom right, and top left and bottom right. When I look at my two equations, I have 2x plus 43 shaded, and 2x minus 3 is not shaded. That means that they add up to 180. So 2x plus 43 plus 2x minus 3 equals 180. So I have several things that can be combined on the left. First, I have 2x plus 2x. That gives me 4x. Then I have 43 minus 3, which is 40. And that still equals 180. Next, I'm going to subtract 40. And that gives me 4x equal to 140. And then I have to divide by 4. And 140 divided by 4 is 35. It wants to know the measure of the angles. So the first angle is 2x plus 43. Since x is 35, I have to do 2 times 35 plus 43. 2 times 35 is 70, and 43 plus 70 is 113. So the first angle is 113. The next angle is 2x minus 3, so that's 2 times 35 minus 3. 2 times 35 is 70, and 70 minus 3 is 67. So my two angles are 113 and 67. And you could check that because we know they have to add up to 180. If you were to add the two angles together, they need to add up to 180 in order to be correct. So if I add 113 and 67, 7 plus 3 is 10, 6 plus 1 is 8, and then bring down the 1, it is 180. So we did that correctly. The last example is a triangle, and we know that the interior angles of a triangle all add up to 180. So we would take literally every one of these angles, add them all up, and then that equals 180. I'm going to do that a little differently than what you've seen because it helps me organize. I have 8x minus 1, 3x plus 4, and 3x plus 9. And I wrote them vertically so I could remember what goes with what since there were so many and they could easily get lost. So I have 8x plus 3x plus 3x. So 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14x. Here I have a negative 1, a positive 4, and a positive 9. So I'll start by adding. 9 plus 4 is 13, minus 1 is 12. So I have 14x plus 12 equals 180. To solve that equation, I would subtract 12. And 180 minus 12 is 168. So I have 14x equals 168. And when I divide by 14, I'm left with x equals 12. So my x is 12. And then I've got to find the measure of my angles. So what I'm going to do is take my 12 and plug it into each one. The first one would be 8 times 12 minus 1. 8 times 12 minus 1 is 95. The next one would be 3 times 12 plus 4. 3 times 12 is 36, plus 4 is 40. And then this one would be 3 times 12 plus 9. And 36 plus 9 is 45. So your angle measurements for that triangle are 95, 40, and 45.